Hi everyone, I'm Gavin Morris. I'm a systems developer and part of the growing Born Digital team, a common media company located down the road in Russell Street in Hadley. I'd like to thank NERD for having me back again, and a big thank you to all of you who helped put on this great event. Like I said, I work for a company called Born Digital, and at Born Digital we believe that data management doesn't have to be complicated. We build sustainable and secure digital repositories using open source software that makes data management simple for our clients. We also offer various services from custom development and theming, metadata consulting, migrations, support, maintenance, and much more. So I've given talks here previously about what I do, and specifically at Born Digital. Today I'm going to talk a bit more about those projects and how they impacted my work journey. To provide you more context, I'm going to give you a quick refresher on what Islandora is, starting with what is a digital repository, what are they used for. For a long part of history, art collections, essays, research, journals, manuscripts have been kept in dusty drawers or storage places hidden from the world and or to only a select few researchers. And now, with a digital repository, they can be shared globally and repeatedly to a vast audience. These digital resources won't age, they won't face destruction from repeated touches, and can be openly viewed, discussed, and used by generations of researchers, archivists, students, and the community. What is Islandora? Simply put, Islandora is a Drupal module, but more abstractly, it's an ecosystem of services and software. These are the major technical components of the Islandora platform. I'm sure many will seem familiar to those of you in the room. Apache and Drupal are basically used for the website that the Islandora Drupal module is enabled on. MySQL handles databases, and Tomcat, along with Java, handles the web apps Fedora Commons, which is for storing digital archives and digital objects, and Solr, which is used to index those digital objects and provide search mechanisms for users. This slide is of a two-server setup. There are multiple configurations. This is the one that we tend to lean towards. Thank you to Williams College and the Unbound support group. Thanks, Cheryl. My job is to create, deploy, and maintain these types of servers using a variety of methods. Bash, manual, Ansible, which is a configuration management tool. And as you can see, there's a lot of complexity and communication and transactions between these two servers once a web visitor using a browser happens to come on by. And this is just a quick view as to what happens under the hood when an archivist, as a use case, has a historical document. In this case, we have this picture that's been scanned digitally, and the archivist logs into the website, and they'll use a web GUI, and they'll attach that file, they'll upload it, and then they'll use a series of forms that are usually XML to describe, well, what am I ingesting? What's the date? Who are these people? Where might they be? At what time period? And other important pieces of information that researchers might want, or what the institution might want to display to its users. Once that is all filled out and ready to go, an archivist will click a button, and immediately the Islandora modules, the libraries, will generate a series of dependency files, which is basically information about this digital object. It'll generate derivatives. So if this is like a huge high-end TIFF file, for instance, you're not going to be able to see that in a web browser, and the system can anticipate that and say, I'll make a JPEG for lower resolution and viewing. And it immediately copies all of this data to Fedora Commons. And that's where it will become packaged as an object in its archives. Fedora Commons will then, through the ActiveMQ message servicing, will trigger Solr to say, hey, I have some new things in my collection, please index them, and get it together so that users can see my metadata and find things easily. And as part of that packaging process, Fedora Commons also generates what's known as a PID, or a permanent identifier. And it gives that information along with namespace information to MySQL. And that way, the Drupal site can map everything properly for a visitor. And so you can imagine this will take a few moments or so, and then it's completely viewable through a web browser for an end user. So what are some of the challenges running this type of ecosystem, the stack, and its software? It's billed as a Drupal CMS powered by Apache web server, which proxies to a Tomcat server running a Fedora Commons repository with Solr for search and object indexing. The real picture is way, way more complex. There are over 70 pieces of software: services, binaries, daemons, shell scripts, Tomcat apps, all with different needs and configurations, which become hard to maintain in different environments and operating systems. This kind of setup leads to challenge in maintenance. Basically, don't touch it, otherwise it might break. Additionally, mistakes, they don't show up right away. And even worse, spinning up the system fresh every time is a test unto itself. And lastly, don't get me started on securing ports and setting up firewalls. So this all devolves into what was once a new system quickly becomes a legacy system. And it's one that all parties don't want to change for fear of cost or potentially damaging the system. Projects become harder to maintain over time due to their unique nature and artisanal scripts, if you will, instead of adhering to classic dry practices. And lastly, it has the potential to burn people out, stress them out too much, and hold them back in development, and especially in advancing their skill sets and testing in particular. So, solutions. Yes. Docker. So I'm not going to get into a deep dive onto Docker per se, but I'm going to give you some key points that we found and have embraced readily. As you can see here, just from a quick visual glance, running virtual machines, which is on the left here, my left, your right, I suppose, it comes with more overhead with running individual operating systems. In fact, worse, most in this kind of setup will sit idle or require resources that potentially can exhaust services and hosts. There's a sort of potential imbalance. And the way that Docker is designed by its architecture, it provides more compact space and resource management by contrast. So Docker uses a client server architecture. The Docker client talks to the Docker daemon, which is running on the host server. Docker can then download pre-made small images from official registries like Docker Hub. I'd invite you to think of that process as like going to the store and getting pre-made cookies. Operating systems can be of any kind, or just software alone can be run as containers. And comparatively, each container uses a very tiny amount of resource, just enough to get running or enough to perform a function. So here's what I experienced when using Docker and Docker Compose. No more waiting for complex setups that could break during deploy. Spin up, use immediately. I can almost 100% guarantee an environment that can be used everywhere. Production, development, local, staging. I've noticed that there are no more snotty exchanges of, well, it works on my laptop. I've noticed that there are no more OS flame wars between me and a potential client IT staff, which is great. You can just use and manage what you want as a host. And lastly, there are cost savings associated with this because you don't need as many hosts or as much maintenance. Docker systems are designed to be portable and modular across all hosting environments. Again, I invite you to think of it as Lego. Docker files are definitely easier to edit and maintain than Ansible scripts. One change on a container won't explode the whole system. And most importantly, shutting down and powering up containers to make developmental changes get faster and faster and have a tighter feedback loop. And this can have a profound impact on your development team because they're more focused. They get quicker results. They can try more creative experiments than they could before. And they can spend more time being thorough. One's train of thought is instant and consistent. No more waiting for weeks. I think this really says it all. This is the biggest paradigm shift. What took us weeks to provision and test manually evolved to days using Ansible and similar tools, and is now hours or minutes using Docker. Clients love this because it's less cost. What really means for developers is that infrastructure gets out of the way. In the medical field, they would call this returning doctors to the bedside. I call it rolling up your sleeves and getting back to work. So where did I get exposed to all of this? How did I learn all of this? I started working on Islandora Enterprise, ISLE, officially and unofficially as the lead systems developer around fall 2016. ISLE is an open source community project that addresses two of the most significant pain points in the Islandora stack: maintenance and installation. Williams College, as part of the ICG, or Islandora Collaboration Group, has received an Andrew Mellon Foundation grant to support developing many new features of ISLE, and this grant period is currently running. It started last October, and it's going to finish up in September of this year. Here are some of the members of the ICG. Some are local, which is great because we get to collaborate with a lot of folks face-to-face and learn from them as well. And here are some of the contributors. And thank you for your generosity. Not all of the members are pictured here, however. So what does the Islandora ecosystem look like in ISLE? As you can tell, compared to previous slides and setups, things are a lot more manageable. Things are a lot more modular. So in the middle, one of the linchpins here is traefik, which is a reverse proxy, and in this case we use it also as a Docker container, which allows Docker and this entire ecosystem here to talk to the outside world via an external and internal network. Traefik also provides SSL termination with Let's Encrypt automatically. So if you have DNS control, you can have free auto-renewing SSL certs, which is also cost savings for folks. Comparatively to the other previous setups, there are very established swim lanes, silos, if you will, for data and transactional flows, which for me help greatly with migrating non-ISLE systems to ISLE, as well as indexing in general. Ports are only open if you expose them. Yes. ISLE uses Docker env files and confd, which is a configuration management tool, to allow further user customization. Things like, I want to change my domain, or I want to change transforms, or I have a file that I want to add to this system. How do I do that? Which leads me to the ISLE toolbox. So we still use, or at least provide, Ansible as a tool for provisioning hosts and containers, even, if you will. But you can use anything to set up a host server. That can include Docker for Mac, VirtualBox, Docker for Windows, you name it. A lot of ISLE is built around confd. So confd was built by Kelsey Hightower of Kubernetes fame, and it's basically described as a lightweight configuration management tool that's focused on synchronizing configuration files by pulling environmental variables and processing template resources, which is a very, very long way of saying this allows end users to have dynamic customization and to basically extend flexibility in Docker images. So it doesn't paint you into a corner when you might have something that may be non-standard, let's say. confd allows you to sort of punch a hole into the image non-destructively and to be able to change it to a value that you want versus what we're telling you to use. Of course, we use Docker Compose. We use Docker Compose for defining and running multi-container Docker applications and services, which are all very easily configured by one YAML file. We use this file in the software to clearly define and group all of the services, their interactions, and most importantly, data locations within ISLE. And YAML is so clear and concise that even to non-technical users, it's almost like it self-documents, which is an added bonus. Again, we use Docker Compose to also achieve a out-of-the-box experience. For those who are new to ISLE, we don't force them to read tons and tons of documentation. We give you a sample Docker Compose file and an installation script, and probably within less than 15 minutes, you're going to be running ISLE and Islandora. And that is a significant barrier to adoption that has now been cleared. So one thing that we do with S6 overlay, which I'm sure for those familiar, it's not quite the Docker way. S6 overlay is a process manager that can run multiple services on a container. And yes, Tomcat, I'm looking at you when I say that. The reason is that a lot of the Islandora ecosystem, sadly at this point, at this juncture, is just, well, old. And what happens is that sometimes there are mysterious container crashes, and what we don't want is a container crashing and then the entire ecosystem crashing. So by using S6 overlay, we're able to get better insight into what exactly a container is doing. Additionally, we've put in better controls to avoid that. Lastly, all of these configurations are kept and managed in version control, and specifically in a completely open GitHub public repository. All of the work that I do is 100% transparent. You can even issue pull requests against what we do here. I will say that we're still trying to tackle some of the challenges of keeping things in Git with respect to state. That is to say, how you shift state from production to development, staging, and so forth. But I have a feeling in ISLE Phase 2, which is what we're currently in, we're going to solve that problem. So, using Docker now allows for more rapid development, more timely understanding, certainly gratification, but lastly, more up-to-date tools and methods to manage everything. What has also opened up is continuous integration is now possible. Before in the non-ISLE world, we were really strictly limited to a small amount of BHAT testing, a whole lot of prayer, a whole lot of animal sacrifice, and chanting. I mean swearing, I mean chanting. Now, when I build a new ISLE system, I can use consistent sample data, and I can test new pushed code within 1 to 2 hours, which again, going back to that earlier slide, we've gone from weeks to days to hours to minutes, which is just fantastic. As you can see, there's been a lot of change and opportunity opened up as a result of switching to Docker. So, spoiler alert, I think you've already guessed by now, my job has not been eliminated, just shifted. All of that time and time savings and benefits have basically opened up a new chapter of opportunity for my personal education, my career, my company, and most importantly, our clients. Here are some of the new opportunities that I hope to have a part in my new job, and certainly within ISLE. We're going to integrate BlazeGraph, which is an indexing database, and that will allow Fedora to basically provide a smoother indexing process and retrieval of over 1 million objects, which is has in the past for previous systems been a significant barrier. We're going to attempt to use Varnish for caching to speed up the delivery of assets, but also Solr queries and other potentially long MySQL queries. We're going to use the ELK stack, which is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, to basically create a series of dashboards utilized for monitoring and log analysis, which will give us greater insight to how we should further tune and optimize this platform for enterprise usage. We're definitely looking at, with a hard stare, at Kubernetes. There's a lot of features in Kubernetes that we think would really work well in ISLE, specifically about the load balancing, clustering, and healing. Amazon ECS, this is something for folks who don't necessarily want to use a server, a host server, but want a platform to manage their containers. That's definitely going to be something that's on the roadmap. But most importantly, and the thing that I'm very excited about, is this Islandora 8. So Islandora is now currently 7x, which is basically Drupal 7x. And so Islandora 8 is going to be Drupal 8. But also on the back end, Fedora jumps to a new version, I think it's 6 now, and it's going to use RDF for its ontology and object management, which is a huge, radical change. And fortunately, in phase 2, we're going to create a roadmap for development on that, which is very exciting. I hope to use HashiCorp Vault. I know Jerry also uses, she's part of CyberArk. Maybe we'll look at that as a possibility. But basically, that is a product for secrets. And the idea would be we would shift from keeping a lot of the configuration and passwords in an exposed manner to something that is just completely tokenized. And there would be less avenues for leveraging these kinds of systems. I can say overall, in my personal experience, I've gone from a systems administrator who was just sort of watching an industry shift, or a tidal wave, of this movement of infrastructure as code. And I've been, I'm grateful that I was granted an opportunity to basically learn what that is, and to not only learn it, but to apply it. So now I'm more of what you would call a systems developer, if one can use that term. I write code to provision, manage, and monitor infrastructure that is in the cloud. No more putting CD-ROMs in trays to install things. And I'm sure some of you remember what a CD is. So everything is new again. And lastly, I'm just grateful to rediscover the joys of being a beginner again in tech. And to most importantly, to learn instead of avoid. So, thank you. This session information, I have a feedback form, which should go to the proper Nerd Summit feedback form. I hope that these session slides will be available at some point on the website. The video will be here on the YouTube channel. And I also like to create a multi-slide resource index. I tend to talk fast. I obviously didn't go into great depth on some things, and so I'd greatly appreciate those in the audience who feel like they had no idea what I'm talking about. I got you covered. What I mean by that is I give you where to go on a lot of different topics. And hopefully I've covered most of them. So I'll just go back and I'll invite everyone to ask questions, please. Please.
What's the progress on Islandora 8? Is it just starting now, or is it getting closer to release?
Yeah, it's getting closer to release. It had been, it's taken multiple years, but I think I haven't heard an official release date, but their IslandoraCon is in October of this year, and I suspect that's the sort of unofficial release. I think they're going to do a Steve Jobs and give all the goodies away at that time, which I'm looking forward to. So yeah, additionally, we're trying to work hard to sort of get that roadmap for ISLE in place, such that it will dovetail nicely with any releases during that conference.
And is there any plan to help with the migration as part of converting to ISLE, like from 7 to 8?
Migration is an interesting topic, so I'm just going to answer it a little bit wider than you probably asked, which is, I think it's several things that we really try to aim to do in ISLE project, which is to first identify those of you who want to jump from a non-ISLE system to ISLE. And I know that on the roadmap, we're going to be producing at least clear documentation, clear workflows, and even some scripts to that effect. I know that there are some simple scripts right now, but the development, the maintainers and the steering committee are going to rally together in the next month or so, and we're going to identify where some of those pain points are specifically in this topic. With respect to the 7x to 8x jump, I know that one of the phases of ISLE phase 2 is to specifically start asking questions like that and to identify what we need to do as a project, but also how we need to work with the foundation to say, okay, we see this, what can we do together? What can we change? Because absolutely, this is something that it's a classic software thing. People wait, and they wait, and they wait, and then something catches on fire, and then they realize, ooh, we can't wait anymore. But then they jump to the new system, which may or may not have the right type of documentation for them, which may or may not have the right amount of experience in the community. So this is something we're really trying to be mindful of, to give people a lot to be able to make that transition faster and sooner.
And as people are getting the warnings about Drupal 7 end of life, I'm sure people are thinking a lot about it, right?
Absolutely, Cheryl. I mean, there's a whole other, like I said, there's 70 plus, and I think 70 is even probably the low number. There's so many things that in Islandora, the ecosystem, that are in serious danger of being an attack vector. What I mean is, like, there are older versions of PHP still being used. The current use of Fedora 3.8.1, that's been ended of life for quite some time. There's a lot of aging software that really needs a hard look by a variety of people. What ISLE sort of implicitly attempts to do is to say, okay, there's not a whole lot of cohesion around what is the standard for that ecosystem, so we're going to try to give a baseline. Here's what we think, and we invite the community to, like, pitch in and correct the assumptions there. So that it's kind of a twofold system. One is to reduce the barrier to adoption, because as you can tell, that's a lot, especially for a small institution that may not have the developer resources that are needed to maintain a system. And then we try to create these processes and workflows that really engage people, so that they can get back to using the system as a tool rather than this huge obstacle.
Is the Dockerized version on the website, is that downloadable, or is that?
Absolutely. Let's see if I can do this right without breaking everything.
And the other question was, what does it take for resources to run it? Obviously, just to start experimenting with it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Your laptop.
Okay.
Let me just pull up. Let's see.
You've got 8 gigabytes of RAM or more, you'll be all right.
Okay.
16 is nice, but 8 will do the trick.
So right here, this is the link, and in my resource index, I give a link to where to get this. And we have a quick start guide. And literally, these are just the requirements. You just need Docker, Docker Compose, Git, and enough time to get a cup of coffee and all that. And you just walk through these steps, which is basically to clone this repo, to go into the directory with the terminal, Docker Compose pull, Docker Compose up -d, wait a couple minutes, as in go get that cup of coffee, come back, and then you run an installer script. And that installer script, depending on your internet connection and the speed of your laptop, it clocks in roughly about 10 to 15 minutes, and voila. You have a fully functioning system that you can play with, ingest things. You can do thematic development, as one of our developers does. And like I said, this has gone down to minutes. This used to take weeks manually, and like full teams and so on. And even myself as an Ansible developer previously, it was like 4 to 5 days of development, 1 day of deploy, and then many weeks of tweaking and configuring. And now that's all gone.
Excellent. Thank you.
Tristan, you had a question?
Yeah. I'm really interested in confd. And I'm just wondering if you could just say a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. Good question.
In general, yeah, and how it applies to this project.
Well, Gavin's pointing that out. If you're interested in trying this out in a workshop environment, next Friday, Smith College is hosting a group called Code for Lib. This is the Northeast regional one, and there will be a workshop, I think from 12:30 to 1:30, where there'll be a room where a bunch of people are setting this up all at once and trying it out.
Is there any additional information on that?
Yeah, I can dig up a link for you.
Okay.
To Google New England Code for Lib 2019.
And it's in the
All right.
numeral 4.
Tristan, you must be roped into organizing this.
Actually, I'm not. I have nothing to do with it. Yeah.
So confd is basically what, as it advertises itself, it's a local application, manages local application configuration files using templates and data from etcd or console. Don't be intimidated by that. It's really key value stores from practically anything, which is really nice. I mean, it can do even from, I think, a CSV file. So it's really quite an impressive thing. I do recommend going to the docs directory. I do give a link, and I'm trying to, oh yeah, there used to be a quick start guide, I think. So yeah, so here it says it handles all these backends, and the way that we do it is we use certainly a docker.env files, which are the environmental variables. These can be configuration values, passwords, tokens, you name it. And I'll give you an example of, so here is our ISLE Fedora image. This runs Tomcat, Fedora, and gsearch. And you'll see in this directory, it basically bakes in that, it installs the confd software, and one of the ways is it creates these directories. And more importantly, it says, okay, you want to change these files, these particular files, config files, we'll give you a series of templates, and there's usually 2. The first is called a template, and so I'll just pick Fedora. And I'll give you, hopefully here's an easy one. This is the Drupal filter. Basically, this is a XML file that says connect a particular Java app to the MySQL backend, and by extension, the Drupal site. This is key to a Drupal site understanding how to communicate with Fedora. And it's, hopefully everyone can see the,
Command plus.
yeah, thank you. Hopefully that's better for everybody. So normally, this value would be a fixed value. And what this allows is, and I'm seeing already that we should be able to change that too, but in any event, this allows users to say, well, I don't want to use that database, or the name of my site is different. How do I change that? If we were to have left that alone, it would be ephemeral, immutable. It would be basically something that is baked in and you could not change. And that's not optimal for users. So what this does is it says, this is a confd function that basically says, get me that environmental variable that conforms to Drupal_db. And lo and behold, you go into that env file, and it will say in all caps, Drupal_db equals your site here. It's a TPL file, and it points to the actions. Let me see if I can describe this properly. So you have a TOML file. So sorry, this is a little awkward. Okay. So before that TPL file was defining what state you wanted, where to pull these values, what values are you looking for. And the TOML file says, okay, that's nice, but here are the actions you have to perform on it. So go get that TPL file. But more importantly, you're not going to put a TPL file into a system, because the system's going to go, TPL file? What is this? So what it does is confd says, oh, you mean the actual file, filter-drupal.xml. Here are the UID and the GUID for permissions. Here's the mode. And more importantly, here are the keys I'm going to pass it. What's fantastic about this is shut down the containers, change the value, bring up the container, new value. Instead of, if we had baked it in, we'd have to build a whole new image. That's not going to work. Hopefully that's clear. It's a
That's really helpful. Thank you.
I do believe that there are several competitors to this, which I think we'll also be looking at as our needs grow, because I don't know if Mr. Hightower is still associated with it as a project. But conceptually, this is what we need for this project.
Can I ask another not so smart question? So you all should know that even though the college that I work at uses this, I have nothing to do with it. I don't get to touch it or look at it at all. So I don't know much about how things connect to Fedora. So when IL comes up, there's the little links to the data. Does all that data, how does that, you don't replicate all that data?
Let me bring up that crazy spaghetti slide.
Oh, that wasn't the one I was thinking of.
No,
Okay. Yep.
I mean, this, to be clear, this still happens in IL. It's just the difference is that a lot of it is self-documented, it's a lot clearer, and to those who are using it, they now know where to go and look for things in a way that it wasn't clear before. I'll bring up the other slide.
Yes, the other one with the nice links to the data. So if I'm rolling a new IL container, does all that data get replicated there in the green box?
Well, this is basically to say the domain. This is a sort of imaginary domain of what Docker and Docker Compose organize.
You're talking about the data store, though,
Yes,
right?
thank you.
Those are different types of data.
So the data there literally is either what's known as a Docker volume or a bind mount. And the bind mount, and to give you an example of what we do with Fedora, is we bind mount the data stream store folder directly, and also the object store. And it sort of exposes to the host for any type of manipulation that you might need. A lot of developers expose the Apache document root, so that they can actually just code with their favorite IDE directly in. But in terms of moving data, part of the reason we also use a bind mount is for exactly that degree of duplication and replication, is that we don't want to use a Docker volume, not because, well, in production, Docker volumes, you'd have to like rip open the host server's setup. You'd have to really pretty much do a very convoluted thing to move those Docker volumes around. Whereas if you bind mount something, you can basically say, give this big disk to the Fedora data and move things around. Now I know there's a lot of thoughts about stateless application and so on. This is a project that is not ready to be stateless yet. So we're on that road, but the reality of production dictates that we need way more flexibility. We're not there yet, but we will be, hopefully. Hopefully that answers your question?
It did, yes,
okay.
thank you. The bind mount thing was...
But it also speaks to the importance of, there's a paradigm shift for someone like me. And I've been working in this field, at least specifically with Islandora, since 2014. I can only imagine how much harder it is for end users, and that's one of the things that we really try to keep in mind when we're designing the software and developing and discussing it. We're always thinking of the end user. What is their use case? What problem are we trying to solve for them? Such that new people, when they come in, it's not that we need to explain all that history. They just go, oh, it's there. Oh, there's a tool. Oh, great. And they get right into the work, which is far more important than the obstacle. The most important thing is that people, because fundamentally what we're freeing up is the sharing of knowledge. We're freeing up teaching tools, which will have amazing impacts for communities and students and people and for the world. And I know that that sounds a little blue sky horizon, but you start with something really tiny. And if you can share information, that's the key to civilization. At least my thoughts anyway. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gavin.